Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you that are joining us today. We are happy to welcome you from the Global Water Operators Partnership Alliance, GWOPA, hosted by UN Habitat, to this online event with the title of The Role of Water and Sanitation Utilities in Realizing the Human Rights to Water and Sanitation. My name is Giuliana Ferrero, and I'm a senior consultant for GWOPA UN Habitat. I will now guide you through the interesting session of today by starting by presenting the program of today. So we have a lineup of 6 interesting speakers. We will start with some opening remarks given by Angela Mwai, the Chief Human Rights and Social Inclusion Unit at UN Habitat. We will continue with a video message that was sent to us by the UN Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights to Water and Sanitation, Professor Pedro Arrojo Agudo. We will continue with a talk by Dr. Gabriela Cuadrado Quesada from IHE Delft on engaging water utilities in the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation. Next up will be Faustina Boache from Ghana Water Company Limited, talking about the revolving fund for social connections in Ghana. We will continue with Samara Lopez Ruiz from the University of Granada. They will talk about strategies of Dutch water utilities to manage these connections amid economic vulnerability. And as a last speaker, we will go to Bangladesh, thanks to Shrin Ara Begum. She will talk about community collaboration in low-income communities in Dhaka, Bangladesh. So we will now move on with the first speaker immediately. As I mentioned, we are talking about Angela Mwai. She is the lead of the Human Rights and Inclusion Unit at UN Habitat. The unit is responsible for 6 cross-cutting issues: human rights, gender equality, youth, gender, older persons, and persons with disabilities. At UN Habitat, they work closely with the Urban Basic Services Unit to ensure that gender equality and social inclusion are mainstreamed in all projects and programs. Angela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juliana, and the GWOPA team for inviting me to make these opening remarks. And it's very important because, you know, we work on cross-cutting issues and we're supposed to be everywhere. But the risk of that is that you're everywhere and often nowhere. So we like it when we're in close collaboration with the team. GWOPA, we've worked with you closely on many issues and the larger urban basic services. But dear GWOPA members, distinguished presenters, very illustrious group I see there, participants and colleagues. It's a privilege to welcome to you all to today's important session on the role of water and sanitation utilities in realizing the human rights to water and sanitation. At the heart of UN's mission lies a commitment to human rights, and UN Habitat has played a pivotal role in supporting their realization globally. Among these rights are the human rights to water and sanitation, which of course are essential for life, dignity, and sustainable development. And here I'd like to mention the dignity for the marginalized groups, mainly marginalized groups, which include women and children. And when I talk about women, I say women's rights are human rights. So these rights have been formally recognized, and mechanisms such as the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights to Water and Sanitation have been established to ensure accountability. However, and advocacy. However, recognition alone is not enough. The transformative power lies in how water and sanitation utilities operationalize these commitments on the ground and in real life. We ask, what are the lived experiences of the users? As we delve into today's discussions, let's consider the key principles that guide utilities in making these rights a reality. Availability. Ensure water supply is sufficient, reliable, and continuous to meet personal and domestic needs, including drinking water, hygiene, and food preparation. Sanitation facilities must be adequate and available in all households, workplaces, health centers, schools, public buildings, public areas, and public spaces. The second one is accessibility. Services must be physically accessible to all, accommodating all the diverse needs, such as those of persons with disabilities, older persons, women and children, and ensuring safe access for marginalized groups, and for me, those often forgotten, such as migrants, refugees, and displaced persons, even the homeless, who may or may not be in permanent or formal accommodation. Affordability. Water services must be affordable to all, and absolutely no individual or group should be denied access to safe drinking water because they can't afford to pay. Again, the marginalized groups that I mentioned above find themselves in the most vulnerable situation and must not be forgotten. Quality and safety. Water must meet safety standards, being free from all hazards and contaminations which are harmful to health. Sanitation systems must prevent exposure to harmful waste, ensuring hygienic and safe conditions for all, and reducing all these pandemics that keep going around that are water transmitted. And finally, acceptability. Facilities and services must respect cultural practices and sensitivities, including privacy and the gender equality considerations. And here I can mention with sanitation issues, there are things with, in communities where girls and the waste that is produced from their activities is often a very cultural issue. It's taboo to talk about it, but it exists in reality and must be dealt with in the proper, respectful way. As we engage in today's discussion, let's consider how we can take the insights and the momentum from this webinar to amplify action. Looking ahead, the upcoming International Human Rights Day on December 10th offers a timely opportunity. And actually, this year, we mark the 76th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Let's use this occasion to reaffirm our collective commitment to ensuring the human rights to water and sanitation are realized for all. I want to thank you, especially GWOPA team, again, for inviting me to speak. And I want to thank everybody for their dedication and contributions to this critical cause. And I wish all of us a fruitful and engaging session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela, for your opening remarks. You managed also to get the numbers up, so we get more and more speakers that are more and more attendees that are joining the webinar. Before moving on with the next speaker, I would just like to draw your attention to some housekeeping recommendations. We do have a Q&A, so feel free to ask questions in the chat mark with the Q&A at any time. We will not address the questions immediately after each presentation, but the presenter will try to address your questions in the chat. If we do have sufficient time at the end of all presentations, we may take up some questions and discuss it openly with some of the speakers. Secondly, I would like to remark that the recording of this webinar will be made available on GWOPA's website, so you can either go back to some of the presentation or share it also with other colleagues that couldn't attend this event. So without further ado, now we can dive right into the webinar and move on with the next speaker. It's Professor Pedro Arrojo Agudo. He is the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation. Previously, he served as an elected member of the Spanish Parliament, during which he was part of the International Cooperation Committee working on human rights. He was professor in the area of fundamentals economic analysis at the University of Zaragoza from 1989 until 2011. So now we have a recorded video that I will ask our colleagues from GWOPA to launch.
Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank you for the honor of this invitation. But at the same time, I must confess that it is a challenge for me, as it involves addressing those who have direct responsibility for managing water and sanitation services, from whom I must learn. And in fact, I learn daily, trying to better understand the issues so that I can provide useful recommendations for the millions of people who depend on you. I hope, therefore, not to disappoint any expectations that may have been raised. I think we are often unaware of what the human right to safe drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene mean. These are not recommendations or good practices that it would be good to promote, but the rights of all peoples living in any city, town, or community in any country, and the obligations of the governments, which are often passed to the municipalities and operators who take responsibility for managing these services. As I have been explaining in my report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva and to the General Assembly in New York, understanding water and sanitation services as business spaces, putting market logic at the forefront, is in flagrant contradiction with the need to promote water and sanitation management based on a human rights approach. On the other hand, it is necessary to explain to our neighbors and make them understand that having truly drinkable water continuously available at affordable prices at their hometops is not a luxury reserved to the richest, but a right that they have and they must demand, just as it is a right also to have adequate sanitation services in conditions of health, hygiene, and privacy for men and for women in workplaces, public places, and in their homes, in their own homes, connected to the sewage networks in cities or to properly maintain septic tanks in dispersed populations. People often consider it normal and unavoidable that tap water is unsafe, forcing them to buy bottled water if they have the financial means, or to assume the risk of systematic diarrhea or other diseases, illnesses, which, beyond the direct disorders they cause, generate serious malnutrition problems, especially in children, by blocking the absorption of nutrients. Increasingly, supply sources are being contaminated by toxins such as heavy metals from mining or industrial activities, or by agricultural pesticides that cannot be purified in drinking water treatment plants. In addition, nitrate pollution from slurry and emerging pollutants such as antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals, which are inexorably generated by large-scale farms, also undermine the portability of sources on which water supplies and the health of population depend. Local councils and operators cannot accept these pollution processes as inevitable, but must inform their neighbors and demand that governments, if necessary in the courts, uphold the primacy of human rights over the productive activities such as these. Contamination very often occurs in the distribution networks when these are in poor condition. Many networks have losses of more than 40%, which often leads to water being served in shifts, in turns, sectoring the urban network and forcing residents to have tanks in which to store water during the hours when they have service. However, in such cases, beyond the problem that a discontinuous service implies, what we find is that inevitably the water, which at source may be of good quality and even adequately treated, reaches homes contaminated by systematic intrusions that occur at the points of leakage when the pressure is removed from the network. In short, while it is true that it is possible to save a large part of the leakage, what is on offer is undrinkable water. This cannot be the normality that is assumed to be inevitable. Maintaining and replacing the supply network at the appropriate rate is an obligation that must be included in municipal budgets by law. At the same time, given the investment effort required to recover from decades of neglect and deterioration of the networks, it is necessary to have investment support from the states in order to progressively achieve networks that can really provide truly drinkable water. Dear friends, GWOPA, let me now briefly draw your attention to water and sanitation services in rural areas, where indigenous peoples and many peasant, pastoralist, and fishing communities in conditions of extreme poverty often manage their own services from community institutions. I believe that it is necessary to promote a strategy of public community partnership, such as that being proposed by the network of community aqueducts of Colombia, la Red de Acueductos Comunitarios, through a proposed law or similar proposals emerging in Chiapas and other Mexican states, in Ecuador, and in other countries. It is necessary not only to recognize and respect the example of democratic, participatory, and responsible management of the peoples and communities that are developing these community approaches. But it is also the obligation of the states, of the governments, to give them the necessary support so that they can guarantee the human rights of all in their communities, establishing by law the public community partnership between rural communities and community institutions, rural municipalities and community institutions and authorities. The financial difficulties that undoubtedly affect you and that greatly condition the fulfillment of your responsibilities must not end up undermining municipal autonomy. The strategies of financialization of the economy extend, among others, to the field of water and sanitation services. For this reason, states must give the budgetary priority that the fulfillment of the human rights to drinking water and sanitation deserves, strengthening municipal capacities and autonomy in order to prevent essential services such as water and sanitation from being left at the mercy of the speculative strategies that preside over the businesses of the great financial powers. It is and will be essential to strengthen citizen participation in decision making, paying special attention to the equal participation of women, institutionalizing citizen water observatories, and selecting socially and environmentally sound technological options and strategies, without forgetting that promoting a human right-based approach to the management of water and sanitation services is above all a challenge of democratic governance. In this respect, I would like to end by recalling the slogan that presided over the citizens' referendum campaign to reject the water privatization that Mr. Berlusconi's government was trying to impose in Italy. It said, "You write water, but you read democracy." Thank you very much.
We are very thankful to the UN Special Rapporteur for sending us this message, and also for remarking the importance of community engagement in order to achieve the human rights for all. We will move on now with the next speaker. If we can get up the... Thanks. So our next speaker is Dr. Gabriela Cuadrado Quezada. She is a senior lecturer in water rights and justice at the IHE Delft Institute for Water Education. Her research and teaching activities focus on the legal and institutional dimensions of water at both the local and national levels, the connection between community water practices and legal instruments, the linkages between human rights law, humanitarian law, and refugee law. She will talk about engaging water utilities in the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation. Gabriela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana, for that kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us. I can see that we have 190 people joining, so thank you very much for being with us. And I would like to thank Juliana Ferrer also for the kind invitation. And I'm very happy to be here with you and to share a little bit of how, from the research that I have been doing and with the people that I'm working with at IHE Delft, the Institute for Water Education, we want to share some of our ideas and our knowledge and how can we engage, that's the title of my presentation, how can we engage water utilities in this overall discussion in the realization of the human rights to water and sanitation. Can we please move to the next one? So I'm sure all of you know that since 2010, safe water and sanitation have been recognized as human rights by the UN General Assembly. So this happened after many, many years of discussions and struggles and social movements and many people around the world pushing their governments to recognize this as a right. So finally, in the UN General Assembly in 2010, finally all the countries came together and said, yes, finally we are going to recognize that having the right to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation is a human right, and that means that is essential for the full enjoyment of life and all human rights. So that means that we cannot say that we are going to fulfill other human rights, for example, the adequate standard of living or the right to food or the right to education or any other right without not fulfilling first the human right to water and sanitation. Because as we all know, we need this to do anything, right? To be alive, to eat, to drink, to be able to go to a school, to be able to have good health. So that was the recognition that finally all countries around the world said we are going to have this in our human rights and inclusion, or all other human rights, finally the human right to water and sanitation in 2010. Please, the next one. But it's interesting to say that even though both of these rights, the human right and the human right to water and the human right to sanitation, were recognized since 2010, after a few years of that recognition, there were a lot of discussion of how good or how well some countries were doing in fulfilling the human right to water. So it was seen that many countries around the world started doing important steps towards the fulfillment of the human right to water. However, when we look at the human right to sanitation, the story was very, very different, meaning that governments were neglecting sanitation when they were trying to fulfill this right. So a lot of focus was given to the human right to water. There were a lot of investment in infrastructure for providing water. However, that didn't happen when talking about sanitation. And there were a lot of discussions about this. Why did this happen? And a lot of people were getting to the very simple conclusion that providing water was something that it was just very easy, very nice. It was just clean and beautiful to show photos and engaging with the communities. However, when we were discussing sanitation, things were a little bit more complex. For example, people were talking about, excretas, they were talking about things that make some people a little bit more uncomfortable. So due to many taboos and many different complications regarding or related to sanitation and sanitation infrastructure, that's why we realized that we were focusing much more on the human right to water. So in 2015, 5 years after we have already recognized this right, there was another recognition just to say, okay, we need to focus and we need to put much more attention to safe sanitation also as a human right. So we were thinking again about this right and made a new declaration, the UN General Assembly, again in Resolution 70-169, when this human right to sanitation was recognized as a distinct human right from that to water. In this one, it was said that the human right to sanitation entitles everyone without discrimination to have access to physical and affordable access to sanitation in all spheres of life that is safe, hygienic, secure, socially and culturally acceptable, and that provides for privacy and ensures dignity, while reaffirming again that both rights, the right to sanitation, but also the right to water, are components of the right to an adequate standard of living. And as mentioned before, we cannot have the fulfillment of many other human rights, like the adequate standard of living, if we don't fulfill first the human right to water and sanitation. Next, please. Next, please. So basically, what does this human right to water and sanitation entitle? And I won't take too long explaining this because it was already mentioned in our introductory remarks or welcoming remarks. I just want to briefly say that when we talk about the human rights to water and sanitation, it is very important for us to think about accessibility. So accessibility for all, availability for all, affordability for all, acceptability for all, and that it is the service is always provided in good quality and safety. Please, the next one. Sorry about this. I think we are going a little bit, it takes a little bit of time to take to the next slide.
There seems to be a bit of time lag. I changed 30 seconds ago. Maybe Juliana, does it also lag for you?
Yeah, it's still stuck on key elements of the right.
Okay. Then let me stop sharing and reshare.
Thank you. Well, so after we have the definition of what are the human rights to water and sanitation, and as I said, there were these five criteria that I just briefly mentioned. After that, there are many people thinking about, okay, in order to operationalize all this affordability and accessibility and quality and safety, what we need to think is to create some building blocks. They're calling building blocks by some people, so we can really get into the discussion or the operationalization of this human right to water. So these building blocks, just to mention where we are taking this idea from, is taken from Sanitation and Water for All, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership of governments and their partners with civil society and research institutions and private sector, NGOs, development banks, donor communities, where they were all of them working together and thinking about, okay, how can we support bringing all this knowledge that we have so far? How can we support the realization of these human rights, right? Talking specifically about the human rights to water and sanitation. So they came up, okay, the basic, or the, let's say, 5 key steps that we need to work with in order to realize the human right to water are: first, sector policy or sector strategy, then institutional arrangement, then sector financing, then planning, monitoring, and review, and finally, capacity development, right? And when we talk about these 5 building blocks, I'm going to focus on how the utilities, so how all of you that you are joining this seminar, how all of you can look at these building blocks to engage in this discussion of the human right to water and improve all the good work that you have been doing so far from the utilities where you are working from. Can we move to the next, please? So, well, now in the last minutes of my presentation, I want to discuss in detail these 5 building blocks and give some examples of some ideas and how these building blocks can be used by all of you, by all of the people who are working in the utilities to really engage in the realization of these human rights of water and sanitation. So as I mentioned, the first one is the sector policy or sector strategy. So this is how all of you, people who work at the utilities, can engage with the sector policymakers. So the first thing here is to be aware of existing policies. So what in each of the countries where you are working, what does the policy say, right? What are the main legal instruments that we have? Do they recognize the human right to water and sanitation? And if so, what are they saying, right? And if not, why not? And who are behind all this, right? That it's very important that you are aware of all these discussions. Then also very important for all of you, all the water utilities, is to lobby for policies to use as human rights-based approach, right? So you can really engage with this discussion in policies, and you can really have support from these instruments, so you can really engage in the implementation of human rights. So another very important thing is to get involved in constantly reviewing and consolidating policy and legal instruments. As many of you know, when the parliament, for example, is discussing new laws about, for example, water laws or environmental laws, it's very important to provide feedback and to get in constant discussion with what the policies should say. So it's very important that the utilities are always and constantly getting involved in this and giving your feedback when these policies are being created or when these laws are being created in your respective parliaments or the policies by your respective governments. And then another very important thing is to ensure that all these policies and legal instruments are then, after being created, that they are being translated into a specific program, a specific guidelines at the utility level, so you can really operationalize the human right to water and sanitation. With this, what I mean is that there's not just enough to say there are policies that recognize the human right to water and sanitation in your country, but that you have a specific ways of actually operationalizing this. For example, that create real budgets that you can use to improve the provision of the services to provide water and sanitation. Next, please. So another one of these building blocks that I will say is one of the most important one is the institutional arrangement. This is to think about what are the particular context in which all of you are working. All of you are working in different countries, in different contexts. So it's very different if I'm working in rural Ghana or if I'm working in urban Manila. So all these are very important needs that they need to be recognized, especially when we are talking about communities with poor infrastructure, so we can, or you can, the utilities can adapt your practices accordingly. So here, the most important message is that the utilities need to create these specific institutional arrangements at the utility level, for example, by implementing progressive tariffs of crop subsidies to ensure that water and sanitation are affordable for all, right? So not just for the ones that they have very high economic levels and they can pay for whatever the cost of the service is, but also for the people that they don't have enough money so that they can also get this service. So of course somebody has to pay, but sometimes we need to question that who has to pay, right? So we have to be creative and think about progressive tariffs or crop subsidies to be sure that the service is affordable for absolutely everyone. And then again, related to that, it's very important to facilitate mechanisms that help vulnerable households, especially, again, as I said, in very problematic areas like peri-urban or rural areas that sometimes are not connected to the services, so they can get connected to the services. And if they cannot, to create that this happens for example, through subsidies for connection or through payment facilities. Next one, please.
Gabriela, sorry to interrupt you. You should try to go a bit faster because we are already over time. I'm sorry.
It's fine. I just have 3 more messages. So the sector financing is about the utilities to be sure that they can lobby and guarantee that governments comply with their obligation to have enough resources so you can provide for water and sanitation. And of course, here the most important is through taxation. Then also create tariff structures with guarantee and adequate provision that allows to accommodate subsidized services, as I said, for being sure always to provide services to poor communities, and having somebody within the utility, a unit that analyze that you are always ensured that you have cost recovery and service sustainability. Next one, please. Well, planning, monitoring, and review, this is about sharing all the important things that the utility does with everybody, right? So creates spaces to share information, and not just the information about what you do, but how can people participate in the different decision-making processes that you have, and implement systems, for example, that provide the consumers that they can see how the service is governed, how the service is distributed, and to create also audits accessible to the public. And finally, it is important that you also create some units that you can, where you can monitor the realization of the human rights, including, of course, potential violations that they might exist in your countries of the human rights to water and sanitation. Next, please. And this is the last one. So capacity development is, for example, what we are doing today. So ensure that utility staff receive proper training to develop knowledge in all the topics related to your responsibilities. For example, the human rights to water and sanitation. And finally, it's important that you participate in or lead awareness campaign on what human rights are and what do they entail, so they can be claimed and protected. And the last one, just to close the presentation, is very important that all of you realize that you are already doing many, many steps to realize the human rights to water and sanitation. So maybe this is just an invitation for you to start with a self-assessment. So you will be surprised how much you are already doing. And of course, it's always important to reflect on how can we improve, focusing always in the service, how do we need to provide this service. That I won't repeat it, but we have already seen what are the key criteria of the service. Advocate always for the human rights to water and sanitation, even outside your utility, and engage with the community. It's always very important to know what the community needs and how can we engage with them. So I will leave it here. Thank you very much. And there are some resources that I use. If somebody is interested in getting more information about this, please have a look at those documents. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. And I'm really sorry to rush you because 15 minutes is not enough to cover all the things that you needed to say. I'm sorry, we're on a tight schedule. It was very informative, and I invite once again all the participants that may have questions to write in the Q&A section, and Gabriela will make sure to address your questions in the chat. So we can move on now with the next speaker. It is Faustina Boachi. She is the Chief Manager of the Low Income Customer Support Department at Ghana Water Company Limited. She is responsible for fostering inclusive water service delivery, in which special attention is paid to serving the low-income urban communities. Faustina, the floor is yours. Faustina, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Julie. And thank you, Dr. Gabriela. After listening to your presentation, I realized that most of the recommendations that you have given aligns with what we are doing here in Ghana Water. And that is why I like the topic that has been given for me to present on social connections in Ghana, the revolving fund for social connections in Ghana. Are my slides ready? Can you share? Okay, before the slides come on board, maybe I can share a story whilst waiting for the slide. Talking about social connections, the need to ensure everyone, irrespective of whether you are rich or poor, has access to water connections. As a young girl, I vividly remember walking over 2 kilometers with my sisters just to fetch water. Those long walks taught me the value of something so simple yet essential. During my secondary school days, the struggle continued. Often in the dead of the night, you would search for groundwater just to make it through the next day in school. The challenge of securing water was a constant reality. I moved on to university. There was water in school, but you came home and you still have to go and look for water in affluent people's homes. These experiences really shaped my understanding of the barriers many Ghanaians face in accessing potable water. I completed university, joined Ghana Water Company, and I remember in my early days as a district manager, the focus was largely on technical solutions, building treatment plants, extending distribution means, and metering households. The assumption was simple. If you can afford a house, you can afford a water connection. However, the reality was starkly different. Infrastructure has expanded over the years, but high connection fees has really excluded many low-income urban households from connecting to piped mains. Recognizing this gap, Ghana Water established the low-income customer support departments to address some of these challenges. And the strategic response of the department is a subsidized new service connection program supported by a revolving fund mechanism. for social connections. Next. And to correct this imbalance, targeted subsidies for low-income households are essential. And that is the approach we have taken in Ghana Water to enable low-income households to also connect to the network. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so I share insights from the World Bank and the Urban Wash program that we have done. Please go to the slide before this. The slide takes too long in showing. Okay, let me speak to the issue. So the need for targeted subsidies to support low-income households in accessing water and sanitation services is evident when we consider the global landscape for wash financing. A key insight from the 2019 World Bank report, Doing More with Less, Smarter Subsidies for Water and Sanitation, highlights the significant role subsidies play in sustaining public water and sanitation utilities. However, the report reveals a critical flaw. The distribution of subsidies is highly inequitable, and the root of this inequality lies in the design of subsidy mechanisms, because wealthier households already connected to piped water networks gain from economies of scale, regulated tariffs, and consistent service delivery. Meanwhile, those most in need, that is the low-income households who rely on expensive informal water sources, are usually left behind. So look at the table on the slide. The average cost of a new service connection in Ghana is about $168 USD. And because we are giving subsidies for households to connect to the utility network, low-income households pay just $32 on average, which is about 19% of the total. This means that we are giving an average subsidy of $136 US or 81%. The numbers you see on the screen highlight why subsidies are vital for expanding access. And this is a recommendation that Gabriela and the experts from the UN also underscored or recommended. So subsidies really bridge the affordability gap, enabling low-income households to also connect to safe, regulated water supply systems. Next slide, please. Let me explain how the revolving fund works. Next slide. You see, the beneficiaries pay only 19% of the new service connection fee or the new service connection tariff. So the beneficiary payments for subsidized connections are deposited into a dedicated revolving fund account. And these funds are reinvested into additional connections. Please, can you move to the next slide? The slide on how the revolving fund works. I can't see it on my screen.
I'm sorry, Faustina, there seems to be a lag. If you can't see it in 10 seconds, I'll restart the slide sharing, but please continue. Thanks.
Okay.
We can see it, Faustina.
You can see it. Okay, then I'll just stick to it. That's fine. So this model, that is the revolving fund model, ensures the long-term sustainability by recycling funds to reach more people, more communities over time. And it ensures community ownership and active participation. And we have also created a dedicated ring-fenced account for all these beneficiary payments, and this has been instrumental in building trust and transparency around the fund. So this is how the revolving fund works. Next slide, please. And our revolving fund approach has opened the door for significant new investments. Currently, we are working with the AFDB after a proposal has been approved, a proposal that we submitted to them has been approved. We are expecting a $25 million project to expand networks and deliver 30,000 new subsidized connections. And this will provide potable water access to over 500,000 low-income residents nationwide in Ghana. And then we are also developing a new project with the Danish embassy here in Ghana to target 10,000 connections in Ghana's northern regions, which will benefit over 100,000 people. So far, we have given subsidies to over 35,000 households to connect to safe water services. These milestones reflect the proactive efforts we have made as a water utility, including conducting over 16,000 baseline surveys to help us attract funding. So on the screen, you see many happy customers of our service who, with little contribution, are enjoying safe water in the comfort of their homes. Next slide, please. But we see that donors are the major source of funding for all these subsidies. We work with the waterworks, we work with the Danish embassy, with UNICEF, with UN Habitat, with the World Bank and others. While the support from our donors is invaluable, we see that it is not a sustainable model. We therefore need to find a solution that will stand the test of time and reduce our dependence on external funding. One of our most significant achievements has been the inclusion of social connections in the revised Ghana National Water Policy, which was released in July 2024, that is this year. So a social connection fund has been proposed with a potential 2% tariff levy, which can generate $2 million annually. And this would subsidize over 15,000 new connections each year through internally generated funds, reducing dependency on external donors. This policy shift, I believe, is a game changer, which will ensure a sustainable pathway to achieving universal water access in Ghana. Our work has also gained international recognition through the EU GWOPA program. We are transferring knowledge and supporting Guma Valley Water in Sierra Leone. These collaborations underscore the importance of leadership, community engagement, and shared learning in achieving sustainable outcomes. So what are the lessons that we have learned along the way? Leadership commitment is key. The dedicated support from top management in Ghana Water has been crucial in establishing and expanding the low-income customer support department. The belief of management in our mission to ensure that every Ghanaian resident in urban Ghana has access to water has empowered us to make significant strides. Also, community engagement is crucial. Solutions imposed from the top down rarely work. It doesn't work. We need to involve communities in the decision-making process, understand their needs, and empower them to take ownership of the solutions. I wrote something down when our second speaker was speaking, that we need to get involved. We need to ensure that we lobby for the right policies to be put in place, and we need to also involve communities. Citizen participation is key. Collaboration also enhances impacts. We work with a wide range of stakeholders, government agencies, NGOs, international partners, development partners, which helps to amplify our efforts and resources. And we also need to be flexible and adapt to changing situations. What we need to know is that what worked 2 decades ago doesn't necessarily work today. We must be willing to adapt our strategies to the changing realities of our time. And then regulatory support is also essential. Progressive policies from regulators, like in Ghana, the Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, to create an enabling environment that supports equitable access to services is really important. And for the lessons, I will also say that economic viability matters. Social initiatives must be sustainable. There's establishments of the Social Connection Fund and the revolving fund mechanism in Ghana Water ensures that our programs can continue to operate and expand without perpetual external funding. And looking ahead, our goal is to fully integrate our model into national policy frameworks and to establish the revolving fund for social connections across all regions in Ghana to be grounded in internally generated funds. And we aim to reach every community that lacks access to clean water, ensuring that no one is left behind. And our ultimate goal really is to integrate the revolving fund model into national frameworks and scale it across Ghana. It is time for every utility in Africa, every utility that still hasn't realized the universal goal of access, to embrace social connections as a gateway to delivering service for all, making the human right to water a reality. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Faustina, for your very interesting presentation and for sharing what you are doing in Ghana in order not to rely on donors anymore. So this is a very remarkable part that you stressed during your presentation in order, of course, to achieve the human rights to water and sanitation. Thank you so much. I can see that there are some questions both in the chat and in the Q&A. So I urge Faustina and also Gabriela and the other speakers to try to address those questions as soon as you can. So we will move on with the next speaker, which is Samara Lopez Ruiz. She's a lecturer and PhD researcher at the University of Granada in Spain and a consultant to the Inter-American Development Bank. She holds a political science degree from the University of Granada and a master's degree in advanced international and European studies. Samara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana, and the GWOPA team for inviting me. Good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to present some of the findings of research that I conducted with my colleagues of EHE, Glass and Gabriela. As the title of the presentation highlights, I will focus on the different strategies that water utilities in the Netherlands apply when addressing the issue of people at risk of disconnection. Next slide, please. Well, despite the recognition of access to water as a human right that we discussed earlier, it is commonly assumed that access problems are confined to low-income countries. However, there are cases in high-income countries like the Netherlands where people's right to water is at risk. For example, because the law allows water disconnections due to non-payment. When this prerogative exists, it is worth to analyze whether the law or the protocols followed by the water utilities apply a human rights approach. In this line, the Netherlands is an interesting case study because the country has only public water utilities and these connections are actually regulated by law. This means that these connections are permitted, but utilities must follow a protocol to avoid them whenever possible. There are other countries, for example, in the European Union or regions like France or Catalonia, where these connections to economic vulnerable people are prohibited by law, but in the Netherlands, they are allowed in certain circumstances. As I said, in the Netherlands, the regulatory framework is defined by the Drinking Water Wet, or in English, the Drinking Water Act, and also there are a rule specifically addressing disconnection for small consumers of drinking water, that is from 2012. These laws oblige water companies to ensure a sustainable supply, but it does not specifically protect from economic vulnerable households. It's important to mention that this law do prohibit disconnection for vulnerable people. However, for this law specifically, vulnerable people is only understand from a medical point of view. So, as I said before, this means that companies can disconnect water services for people that do not pay their bills, but they have to follow a detailed protocol that you can see in the flowchart. I can not explain it in detail, but people who want me to explain it in detail, we can talk in the questions after. But this protocol, it's important to say that establish a minimum requires or steps. And one of the minimums requires are the utility has to send writing letters to the customers, advice of help options like debt management, and advising the client that the disconnection cannot not take place before because of health reasons. And also they have to make efforts to contact the client personally. But it's important to consider that this personal contact in the law is ambiguous. Why I say that? So, because personal contact can be face-to-face visit or also only calling them to the phone. But if the client do not answer the call, it's also legally to proceed to the disconnection because they try. So although all companies must comply with the same minimum protocols, there are notable differences between water utilities. Some utilities add extra steps, and the cost associated with each step varies significantly between the water utilities. So the disconnection process, depending on where you live, can cost anywhere between 100 euros or 500 euros. This is, for me, a very important difference on equity. And if we talk, next slide, please, just to go, well, this is about the methodology, just to explain that to collect the data of this research, we conduct document review, analyzing Dutch legislation, utilities policy reports, government reports, and also we have the opportunity to interview 12 key stakeholders. We interviewed different civil society representatives, NGOs, experts, legal experts, also water utilities, and debt collecting agencies. So next slide, please. After interviewing these key stakeholders, we find the findings were very interesting for us because we discovered that the key stakeholders had different approaches to the issue of disconnection. On the one hand, civil society represented by, as I said, water rights experts and NGOs criticized the current legal framework for lacking a human right approach. While they understand the necessity of applying the cost recovery principle and agreed that disconnections sometimes are necessary to prevent non-payment culture, they believe that protocols and utility behaviors need to evolve to protect vulnerable populations who genuinely cannot pay. And it's interesting because in the Netherlands, the main focus of civil society is not people, for example, unemployed, but to include as an exemption households with children. And on the other hand, we found that not all water utilities share the same perspective. While all utilities must comply with cost recovery principles to remain financially sustainable, Their analysis of the problem influenced the strategies they developed to address it. As shown in the figure, civil society representatives and water utilities balance human rights principles or approach and cost recovery in a different way. And next slide, please. For this presentation, I only speak about 5 different strategies that we identified during the interviews that showcase a blend of financial responsibility and social sensitivity. The first strategy focuses on an early intervention, and most utilities recognize that preventing debt escalation is far better than managing later. For instance, some companies send multiple reminders, just remind that the protocol obliges them to send one of them. But in this case, most of them send 2 or 3. And they try to work closely with customers to create personalized payment plans. Utility C, for example, they offer plans where customers can pay as little as 10 euros per month, helping them in financial distress to stay connected to essential services. Similarly, Utility F takes a social approach to debt collection. They prioritize dialogue, ensuring customers to feel supported rather than penalized. And this contrasts, for example, with more rigid approaches like Utility A, which only adheres strictly to the protocols, intervening only after the household has arrears accumulated. And the second strategy emphasizes partnership with municipal social services. They all have different degrees of collaboration, but what I want to stress is that by working together, utilities and municipalities ensure that vulnerable households receive support before disconnections becomes a reality. For example, Utility E has set a system where they work hand in hand with local governments to identify at-risk customers and offer tailored pre-disconnection solutions. Also, Utility D goes a step further by involving community feedback, ensuring their policies are aligned with local needs. While, as I said, all utilities engage with municipalities to some degree, those like D and E stand out for their proactive and integrated collaboration. And this is really important because in the interviews, what they told us is that sometimes institutional capacity of the municipalities influence a lot the ability of the utility and also the household to stop or minimize the disconnections. Next slide, please. Or no, we are in the good one, sorry. And about the third strategy, now what I want to stress is that some utilities have taken into upon themselves to address the specific needs of vulnerable population. An excellent example of this is Utility E. Sorry for the letters, but I have to anonymize the utilities. But in this case, this utility ensures that families with children under 4 years old are not disconnected. This is not because the law prohibits the disconnection, but because as utility, they think that they have to go a step further and they don't want to cut off from the system people who has children at home. So showing a commitment to social responsibility. And this contrasts with utilities that follow stricter interpretations of vulnerability, such as only protecting households with verified health risk. The fourth strategy, community-based interventions, highlights the community-focused approaches that some utilities apply. Utilities that adopt this strategy aim to build trust with their customers while offering financial relief. For instance, Utility C categorizes customers based on payment behavior and tailor interventions accordingly. This target approach has significantly reduced disconnections over the years, while some utilities maintain uniform tariff structures. Those like Utility C adapt to the specific needs of households with economic problems. And finally, the last strategy that we want to explain in this presentation, it's that many utilities are rethinking how they approach debt collections. Instead of treating it as a purely financial problem, they are putting the customer dignity at the center. For example, Utility F exemplifies this with their human-centered approach. Before disconnecting a customer, they conduct face-to-face visits, engaging with families to understand their challenges. In some cases, also technicians of this utility are even authorized to pause the disconnections if the family demonstrate a willingness to seek assistance. This approach, again, contrasts with utilities that focus more on cost recovery, where financial priorities can sometimes overshadow the human element. So these five strategies, we think, that demonstrate how Dutch water utilities are redefining their roles, moving from purely service providers sometimes to agents of social equity, and that they can be this kind of agents, whether through early engagement, municipal collaboration, target programs. They are showing that it's possible then to balance financial sustainability with a human right approach. And next slide. How much time I have left?
Samara, I'm sorry, but not much, maybe a couple of minutes.
Okay, perfect. So just to mention, the social impacts, what I want to say is the profile of people disconnected from the service change a lot between countries. For example, I'm from Spain, and elderly are more at risk of being disconnected. But what happens in the Netherlands is that we found that our single parents and refugees, for example, or people that do not know the language. So there are language barriers. And this is important because the recommendation is we have to conduct this kind of research locally to know how to better improve the policies. For example, there is a language barrier. We have to try to send the information in different languages. And the consequences is just to remind that when you are cut off from the service, you are not only cut off from the service, you also are exposed to shame, stigma. Also, you are more likely to have health issues, as we saw with the COVID. So just to remind these issues. So next slide, please. Maybe you are seeing the next slides. I think it's about the civil society. Just to mention that NGOs in this particular country are trying to make advocacy not as a public demonstration, but through from a legal perspective. They are trying to defend their rights in the courts. So next slide, please. That is more important. Just to finish. Well, when we consider the lesson from the Dutch approach to manage water disconnections, there are some key takeaways that we have to mention, and actually they are similar to the Ghana case. First is the need to balance financial sustainability with social responsibility. This is crucial and can be done, as the Dutch case demonstrates. They have a role, but there are utilities that go farther. The second one is that proactive engagement is essential. Early actions like personalized payment plans and consistent communication with customers have proven effective in reducing the risk of disconnection. So we need to address the problem before it escalates, because the cost of reconnection is worse for the person, because they have to pay between 100 to 500 extra. Also, that in the Ghana case was mentioned is the power of collaboration. Partnership between utilities, municipalities, and civil society is it's a value in itself. This collaboration ensures that the root of the cause of financial difficulties, for example, unemployment, unexpected expenses, are addressed rather than just treating the symptoms, that is the disconnection. And the need, in the case specifically of Netherlands, of the definition of vulnerability. I think it's a lesson that we all can learn when designing policies. Vulnerability is not just about health risks. In my opinion, socioeconomic challenges like being single parent or experiencing a sudden financial shock should be also be factored into policy design. And also, it's just the final, because I think I'm without time. In summary,
if you can wrap up, Samara, please.
Yeah, sure. In summary, while the Netherlands has made progress in balancing financial sustainability and human rights, significant challenges remains. Water utilities need closer collaboration with municipalities and NGOs to ensure that no household is excluded from water access. And I hope this presentation has demonstrated how human rights-based approach can be integrated into water management to create more equitable and sustainable system. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will happy to answer any question in the chat.
Thank you so much, Samara, for the interesting case study presentation from the Netherlands. I'm sorry to rush you once again. It's all very interesting, but
my bad.
we have to move on. Thank you so much. The next speaker is Shirin Arabegum. She's the project coordinator for the GWOPA Water Operator Partnership between VEI and Dakawasa in Bangladesh since 2018. She holds a degree in social science and has more than 20 years of work experience in the wash sector in both rural and urban areas, 15 of which working with Dakawasa. Shirin, I'm sorry.
Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. I'm looking the 109 people to join this webinar. I would like to my gratitude to the participants who are joining this webinar. I also like to my heartiest gratitude to the Juliana for giving me the opportunity to say something about the webinar. Thank you very much, Juliana. Please, next slide. Next slide, please. Juliana, can you hear me, please? Next slide. Yeah. Bangladesh is located in the South Asia. Dhaka is the capital city of Bangladesh. Dhaka is the most densely populated city in the world. 25 to 27 million people living in the Dhaka city. Due to the socio-economic condition and climate change, every day 2,000 people move to Dhaka for their livelihood. Many people live in the informal settlement. In here, we show the flag of Bangladesh and city of the Dhaka city. Move on the next slide, please. Dhaka Water Supply and Sewerage Authority is the only one water utility who is responsible for the water supply for the mega city Dhaka. This Dhaka was established in 1963. The duration is 400 kilometers. Populations have 25 million. They have a water source is 33% of the service water and 67% of the groundwater. The per day capacity in the 27,000 MLD. They are committed to the 24/7 pressurized water for the people of Dhaka city. Next slide, please. Low-income community in Dhaka city. Earlier slide we saw that to every day 2,000 people move to the Dhaka city. they started living in the low-income communities in the informal settlement. Basically, in the Dhaka city, there are many vacant government land. They are started living in that vacant land. And that area, informal settlement, highly populated densely. It is 10 to 15%, the higher term to the city overall density. And in the LIC area, low-income area, utility service in settlement is very lacking. They did not get the human rights. In the picture, we saw in the informal settlement, they are using the open latrine, they are using the illegal water, they are in the one small room, living in the more to five to seven or more than people living in the one small room. In the picture, we saw the two children go for the water collection. But now they're time to go for the school, time to go for the play, but they did not go for that because they are expending their time for collecting the water. So it is not their human rights is happening in the LIC area or low income area. Next slide, please. Next slide. Dhaka Water, earlier I said that Dhaka Water is the only water utility who is responsible for the water supply in the whole city. The Dhaka Water has for the low-income community, Dhaka Water have a two model. One model we thinking in the community-based organization model, CBO model. Another model is social enterprise model. In the picture, we saw the construction one on the ongoing pipeline installing, water platform construction, and after construction of the work, people are collecting water. In the picture, we saw the water point and all communal connection, and also the community toilet in the picture. Next slide, please. Please, next slide.
We can see it already.
Yeah, no, I cannot see. Oh, yes, I cannot. I did see the previous slide, existing slide model of that. I cannot see the next slide. Oh, in here, yeah, this, okay. This is the community-based CBO model. In the informal settlement, they did not get the holding number from the Dhaka City Corporation. And Dhaka Washa have also the one barrier that without a holding number, they did not get the legal water connection for the informal settlement. Then Dhaka Washa changed their bylaws in 2005. Without any holding number, they get the water connection by the CBU, via of the CBU, community-based organization. And they provided the communal stand post, 5 to 7 families using this water point. Basically, this project implemented by the NGO funded by the project, and NGO is facilitated that model. And for the informal settlement, Dhaka Washa also reduced their installation charge 50% discount for the low-income community people. And tariff is the same like the other domestic connection tariff is the same, similar to the informal settlement people. And Dhaka Washa already covered the slum, 62% slum already covered by the legal connection, and population coverage by the 80-60% of the informal settlement. And revenue collection is 90%. It means that, and our experience is like that, if poor people get the water supply, legal water supply, they are willing to pay their bill regularly. Thank you. Next slide, please. Community-based organization, earlier you mentioned it, it is funded by the
We can still hear you, Shirin.
phone this Fazil Kothakar. Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, I have in the community, in the CBU model, it is funded by the Dhaka Washa and facilitated by the NGO. NGO started for the community situation, community mobilization, community demand, find out the community demand, and they formed the CBO committee. And CBO, on behalf of the community, CBO committee worked to the NGO, and via user group, via CBO committee, they will apply to Dhaka WASA for getting the legal connection. And CBO also responsible for the meter reading, the monitoring for the meter reading, caretaker CBO also responsible for the due bill. And by the project, they also provided the caretaker training after getting the legal water connection. Sometimes it also need to the repair. In this figure, they also provided the caretaker training for the user group per water 0.2%. They also provided the hygiene promotion for the better hygiene practice. Next slide, please. And in another model is a social enterprise model. It is initiated by the France NGO in 2016, and it is established only the one slum in the Dhaka city. In that model, NGO get the connection from the NGO get the bulk water meter connection permission from Dhaka WASA, and that bulk water they will connect it in the Dhaka WASA distribution network. And after that, they collecting the water from Dhaka WASA line and stored in the underground reservoir. And after the underground reservoir, they purified the water and they have stored the water in the overhead reservoir. And after that, they will supply water household level. And in the tariff is tariff Dhaka WASA standard tariff plus services, because they will go for the purification of the water and household level. In this figure, they have also added the services in this model. Dhaka WASA basically maximum slum they are providing the social CBO model. Only one slum they provided the social enterprise model. Next slide, please. This is the elements of the human rights in the concept of the water and sanitation. If you think the affordability in the community-based model, then it is the tariff is the same. They get the 60% discount on the connection fee and the tariff connection by the party. So it is affordable for the people. And the social enterprise model, the tariff plus service charge, but the collection in the weekly basis. So it is also the affordable for the people. And accessibility increase the number of the legal connection. Increasing the number of the legal connection because it is accessible for all people. It is both are eligible for the both model. And availability, yes, though it is the communal water point, 5 to 7 families use the water, but they get the 24/7 water. So it is no problem for that. Which earlier slide, we know there's more densely populated in the LIC area, so they get it is easily available for the water for them. And at the social enterprise model, it is also 24/7 because it is the household connection. And regarding the accessibility, community engagement is there during the site selection. We try to engage the community people, which place will be the user friendly for the community. So we selected that site, so it is acceptable for them, and it is high acceptable because the household connection. And quality and safety is, of course, both model is the quality and safety assured because it is the legal new network established, new connection, legal connection. So quality is very good, and because it is the improvement quality because the legal connection. And here is the sustainability aspect. We think the CBO model, there is a lack of sustainability, long-term sustainability mechanism is lack in this model. But in the social enterprise model, it is prioritizes the cost recovery and expand the service and effective of the sustainability. So it is also the sustainable model. We think that it is the long term. Also, the social enterprise model is the long term project, 10 to 15 years. So it is sustainable. So, next slide, please. Thank you, everyone, for your patience for hearing my presentation.
Thank you so much, Shirin. I'm sorry once again to rush you. It was very interesting, the content of your presentation, and I'm glad to say that we managed to complete despite the technical challenges that we had. So thank you so much. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Yes, thank you.
There are still some Q&As that are unanswered. I'm not sure if we can still continue to answer the Q&A after the webinar will be closed. I would just like to briefly call up Julie Perkins, which is the program manager for the GWOPA program, and ask Francie to move on to the next slide. She will just take 1 minute of your time illustrating the upcoming new phase of the EU GWOPA program. Julie?
Juliana, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Please
thanks.
go ahead.
Thanks so much, and thanks really to the speakers. I really feel like it's a pity that I'm speaking instead of a question and answer, which I think would have been really, really interesting to have, and hoping we can have that offline after this. So thanks so much to all the speakers for really these super insightful, conceptual, practical contributions to this important discussion around where utilities and human rights to water and sanitation connect. So rich and valuable. And I wanted to just, let you know that one of the impetus for this webinar was the GWOPA program. You may have heard of it. It's UN Habitat GWOPA's flagship GWOPA program that's currently funding 22 GWOPA projects around the world. And we're really pleased that we've just been able to enter into a second phase, bringing another 14 million to this program. It's going to allow us to work for another 6 years, facilitating new and continued GWOPA projects around the world, helping utilities to help their peers make these capacity and performance improvements towards the SDGs. And in this new phase, we're talking about important levers, things that are cross-cutting that will make a big difference in the impact that these GWOPA projects will have. An important one that we're looking at is the human right to water and sanitation. And so this webinar has helped us very much, I think, in articulating how that might come across in terms of the call, the types of projects we're looking for, and so on. And so moving forward, I mean, I'm not going to tell you much about this right now. And I'm not even sure if my slide is showing there. Yes, there it is. Okay. Just to let you know that there will be this opportunity coming up in the new year, in 2025, probably like second quarter of the year, for new projects. Thinking about those that are interested in connecting this with human rights to water and sanitation, which are obviously inform all of our work, but with more of a focus on that, there will be more clarity on what what that looks like in the projects. And we encourage you in the meantime, if you're wanting to get a kind of kickstart, to please engage in doing some sort of self-assessment. There's some interesting tools that have been shared, but I think some sort of self-assessment and self-awareness of the utility that will be supported by these GWOPA projects in terms of their human rights to water and sanitation situation will be a very useful starting point. So keep an eye out, and please follow us for more information about that. And just if we could go to the next slide, Juliana, just that there is these also many other ways to follow GWOPA. If you're not already part of our community and part of our community of practice, we'd love to have these kinds of conversations where utilities and these guiding global frameworks, the Sustainable Development Goal and human right to water and sanitation are connecting, trying to make that practical with bringing together our members. Thanks very much. Back over to you, Juliana, and thank you so much to the speakers.